Hey, it's David Weiner, the director of In Search of Darkness and In Search of Darkness Part 2. You are listening to The Graveyard Show.
Welcome to The Graveyard.
And welcome to another edition of the Graveyard Show podcast. I am a caretaker, and the graveyard is open. Well, as promised, I've done a quick turnaround on my latest podcast since I wanted to get it to you before Halloween, and there are several reasons for that. Hot off the presses, as they used to say back in the newspaper business days. And as you heard at the top of the show, director David Weiner will be joining me in just a moment to discuss his horror documentary, In Search of Darkness, a journey into iconic 80s horror. And it's currently streaming on Shudder, so if you have the app, you can definitely catch it there. This was an interview that I've been really eager to do since reaching out to David back in August. And at that time, he wasn't available to do the show, but he did ask if we could revisit this in October, and I did. As soon as the calendar switched over to October 1st, I wanted to get in touch with him, but I thought that might be a little too eager, and I just waited till October 2nd to reach out to him. So here we are, and I think you guys are really, really going to enjoy this interview. I have to thank David for being so patient with me, because every time we had scheduled time to do this interview, my schedule would change, and I had to reach back out to him and say, can we move it here? Can we move it there? And it got to a point where it was kind of getting embarrassing for me to do. But David was a real pro, really understanding, and I can't thank him enough for rolling with me with this in order to do this show. So getting back to the movie, if you have Shudder, as I mentioned, and you're a fan of 80s horror, and who isn't, and you haven't seen it yet, what are you waiting for? This is a must-see documentary. Now, if you don't have Shudder, stand by, because David will tell you another way you can catch this really well-done documentary. Now, if you saw the title of this podcast, this is part one. This is going to be a two-parter. There was just absolutely no way that I could have done this film justice by trying to cram it into one show. I was not going to do a short show with this, and I wasn't going to do a really, really long show either. I've done that in the past, and it's just not good. So I thought it would be better to split this up between this podcast and the next podcast. The movie's 4.5 hours, and it spans 10 years. So even with the two podcasts, I'm still not going to be able to get to everything that I wanted to. I probably could have done 5 podcasts on this movie and still had a ton more questions to ask David as well. Now, if you were paying attention to the show open, you would have heard David say that he's the director of part 1 and part 2. That's right, my friends. There is going to be a part 2 coming your way very, very soon. And we will get into those details this podcast, because there is a time-related offer for anyone interested in contributing to the film. And by contributing to the film, you're going to be getting a lot of excellent goodies, such as the Blu-ray or the DVD of part 2, your name in the credits, and a whole bunch more other stuff that David will get into. And after the interview, I will go through everything as well, and we'll give you the website that you can go to get this offer. But again, it's time limited, and it's up to midnight on Halloween. So if you're listening to this before Halloween or on Halloween day, you're definitely going to want to go to the website to take a look at it. Now, if you want to get in touch with the program, the email address is gyspodcast@gmail.com. gyspodcast@gmail.com. All right, I'm not going to waste any time. We're going to get right to it. So as you hear in the background, a new grave is being added to my graveyard. And that means, of course, my guest has arrived. Now, you know what? Hold on, guys. Hold on. Wait. Hold on for a second. I want to do something different. We're talking about the 80s here, man. And I grew up in the 80s. I want to do this right. Let me put this on right here. Still fits. Yep, and I'm still a member, baby. I look good in this. Oh, and look what I just found right here. Oh, yeah, let me put these on. These are my aviator sunglasses, baby. These are sweet. Now, some people might look at me and say, be afraid, be very afraid. But you know what? I say groovy. And hold on. Now I got to play some tunes. So let me break out my old gray Panasonic boombox. And hey, there's a tape still inside. Let's see. Yeah, there we go. Okay, guys, you can continue. All right, well, it's time to talk 80s horror, man, and I'm ready to go. David Weiner's here, and what I have to say to him is real simple. Thrill me. In Search of Darkness is a documentary that explores 1980s horror movies through the perspective of the actors and filmmakers who made them, as well as their impact on contemporary cinema. And you can currently stream the film on Shudder. David Weiner is the writer, director, and one of the producers of the film, and his list of credits is incredibly impressive. He's a regular contributor to The Hollywood Reporter and the LA Weekly. He was executive editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine from 2015 through 16, and he worked at Entertainment Tonight for 13 years as senior editor of ET Online. Now, if that's not enough, he's also a Rondo Hatton Award winner 2 years in a row, so you get the picture. He's experienced, he's knowledgeable, and he joins me right now inside the graveyard. David, it's a real pleasure to welcome you to the program.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to dig myself up out of the grave.
Well, before we get into your great film, I just want to kind of talk a little bit about you first. I think you're one of those few people that were able to reinvent themselves career-wise and do it incredibly successfully. You started working in production as a production assistant and an assistant director, and then you made the jump to working as a writer and a magazine editor. So how does one do that?
Tenacity, drive, failure, ambition, confusion. There's lots of dreams when you come out to Los Angeles to work in the film industry. And when I was a kid, I knew early on that I wanted to work in movies and I wanted to make movies. And using that as sort of my impetus. After I went to Ithaca College and I went to film school, I came out to Los Angeles, and my first dream was to work on movie sets. I wanted to be some important person who was clutching a walkie-talkie, running around, being part of the entire team that makes movies. And that was my goal. And I achieved that dream, and I worked for a little over 4 years on movies, TV, commercials, music videos, in a variety of roles, but I decided I kind of wanted to be an assistant director. But at times like that, when you just sort of took what you could get because you wouldn't always get those jobs, I realized that you kind of need a plan B even in production. And I kind of realized also that no one was going to hand me a directing job on a silver platter. You got to sort of create your own opportunity. So for me, I figured writing is sort of the way to do it. And if I'm going to be a screenwriter, I need to know not only how to write, even though I took some screenwriting classes in college and creative writing and so on and so forth, but I needed to understand the process of how this stuff goes through the system, the sausage factory and development. So it can be a very long, circuitous path in terms of the way I tell this story, but the nutshell is I kind of realized after about 4 years I didn't want to run around the set standing for 15 to 18 hours a day for the rest of my life. And I wasn't going to get an opportunity to make movies myself if I didn't start writing movies or working in development and figuring out the process. So that was sort of the beginning of my journey of getting off the set and figuring out how to best create opportunities for myself.
That is quite the story.
And that doesn't even bring in the journalism. I can get to that later. But,
yeah.
I got into development and started doing script coverage and figuring that out and writing my own scripts. The first script I ever wrote, was not worthy of wrapping fish, but that's the best one. You get it out of your system, But yeah, by reading and by analyzing other people's work and other people's scripts and reading, good, bad, and ugly material, you become a better writer yourself because you become very analytical in terms of structuring a story.
And I think people don't understand too, like in the role of an assistant director. So while you're running the set, you're running base camp, you're running the sets, you're basically in the center of the storm. It is exhausting. It's very tiring. You are on your feet, 18, 20 hours a day. You're running around. You're doing, thousands of things a day. And
yeah, you're first on the set and last to leave, essentially.
Yeah. And
transpo is the only one who sort of stays longer than you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's like, you get home at 2 a.m. and you got to be back on set at 8. And it's just like, okay, here we go. So you made the move into writing, and you found your way to Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, certainly one of the great magazines. How did you end up working there?
Well, I'll throw in a very quick preamble. Is after development, I started working for a lot of web companies. I was sort of the .com poster boy of, there'd be this magnificent startup, and I'd work for them, and they'd blow up and get really big, and then they'd implode because they couldn't figure out their business plan. And so I was a .com boom and bust boy many times over. But by doing that, I honed my online journalism. At the time, I didn't even want to call it journalism. I didn't think it was as lofty as journalism. But as the dynamic changed, I basically started writing more and more and more and more. And so online writing to me was very consistent, and entertainment reporting was very consistent for me. And so in between development and .com booms and busts, that's where I was in Entertainment Tonight for 13 years. But what happened was with Famous Monsters, which was just one of my all-time favorite magazines as a kid growing up that I used to read all the time, because I was an absolute monster kid. One day I was coming from a junket at J.J. Abrams' Star Trek Into Darkness. I did a junket where I interviewed the cast and took a tour of that robot, and it was pretty cool. And I ran to a Hobbit screening, and the guy in front of me in line had a Famous Monsters sweatshirt. And I just said, "Hey, what a great sweatshirt." And he said, "Thanks." And I said, "Well, I love that as a kid." And he's like, "Well, I'm the editor of the magazine. What do you do?" And I told him I worked at Entertainment Tonight and that I just come from a Star Trek junket. And he said, "Well, I've been looking for someone to bridge the gap between the TV series and the J.J. Abrams movies. How would you like to write the article?" And I'm like, how would I write? First of all, up until that point, I was just an online journalist. And here I have an opportunity not only to be in print, but to be in the magazine that I loved as a kid. So twist my arm. And,
yeah, exactly.
So I ended up interviewing J.J. Abrams. I was able to secure him for the interview, and they loved what I wrote. And I started writing for them while I was working at Entertainment Tonight, just sort of on the side, because it was super fun for me. And I'd do articles about Ray Harryhausen and the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad and a variety of other things. And when I left Entertainment Tonight after 13 years, their doors were wide open. They said, "Come work for us." And it was my absolute joy and pleasure to jump onto Famous Monsters, first as managing editor and pretty quickly as executive editor, because Ed Blair, who was the editor-in-chief of Famous Monsters, who was so kind to give me that opportunity, he moved on to greener pastures. And next thing I know, I'm the editor of Famous Monsters. That's
incredible. I mean, these are the kinds of stories that, that I love to hear. You just kind of stand there just talking to somebody, and it's just like, "Hey, oh yeah, want to come work for me?" Sure. Okay.
Well, if I could, sort of dial into that for a moment, that's been some of the real great serendipity of my career, is taking an opportunity just to speak out when I saw something. That's how I got into the whole .com thing, because I was watching TV one night. I decided to take some time off and work as a waiter. And so I was a server at California Pizza Kitchen, which was actually one of the best jobs I ever had, because I could write 3 scripts, do script coverage, and hone on my writing while I just made some flexible cash. And I remember watching TV, and this is when the internet was at its infancy. And I saw this thing about this thing called The Spot, which was sort of like Melrose Place meets the real world online. And I'm like, I didn't know you could do that with the internet, programming, shows. I thought it's just email. This is all new to me. I was a bit of a tech Luddite, and arguably still am. But the guy who created this show turned out to be my camp counselor from when I was a kid.
You gotta be
called the
kidding me.
news, and I called the news station, and I said, you just did a piece on this guy who did this thing called The Spot. I'd love to get in touch with his production company. They gave me his number, and it turns out that his office was literally in the same structure, the same area where I was a waiter at California Pizza Kitchen, and we had just never crossed paths, but we were literally hundreds of yards away, and we connected, and then he invited me to work for him, and I said, okay, sounds like a plan.
Wow. What are the odds of that? That is incredible. I mean, that's just, I mean, talk about just circumstance and it's opportunity. It's like, okay.
Well, I couldn't have manufactured that, right? But to me, I think of that and I think to myself, I was proactive.
Yeah.
I could have been like, wow, hey, I know that guy. That's cool. Anyway, back to what I was doing. But
exactly.
I picked up the phone and I dialed a number, and I never expecting to get a job out of it, but I wanted to connect with my friend,
And, people listening to this out there, they should pay attention to that, because it's like those little things. It's just, you make that one little call, you make that, whatever, connection, and you follow up on something, and you just never know what's going to happen. And I mean, talk about two great stories. I mean, that's fantastic.
Can I tie? I'd love to, tie it all together.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, there are other. I have lots of strange things like that in a good way that happen in my life, but that's why I'm making the movies that I am now. The In Search of Tomorrow, In Search of Darkness, part 1 and part 2. In Search of Tomorrow, which is a sci-fi documentary, which I have up next. It's all because when I was at Famous Monsters, I made some friends on a set visit of The Conjuring, too. And, we were on set all day waiting for our opportunity to talk to the cast and chit-chatting with fellow journalists. And I made, several new friends. One of them was Jessica Dwyer, who's a journalist herself. And she, I invited her after we met to write for me for Famous Monsters. And she did a wonderful job. We just kept in touch. And when I left Famous Monsters, a bit reluctantly, but, the magazine print was not doing so well. So I had some unfortunate reasons why I reluctantly had to leave. But I was trying to figure out my next gig and starting to write for The Hollywood Reporter and LA Weekly. And one day she just called and she said, I'm part of this project that's doing a documentary on 80s horror movies. And I don't even know what you could do for them, but you'd be perfect to be part of this. You should talk to the executive producer, Robin Block. And I said, cool, sounds great. I mean, I was freelance. I was just taking a walk in the park, literally, when I saw that email. And I said, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Who knows what this will be? But why not? It seems pretty cool. Let's investigate. And I thought their artwork was really cool. I thought their teaser trailer of clips was amazing. And I thought, these guys definitely are fans. They definitely understand it. Let's talk to them. And I offered up my services as, I can interview. This is what I do for a living. I'd love to help you out with some of the LA shoots if you need it. And next thing I know, I was offered the opportunity to write and direct it.
And it all comes full circle. That's incredible. Holy, I did not expect to get down this pathway through that road over there. That is amazing. I mean, who would have thought that all of this would have tied together like that?
Yeah, I think maybe I make it sound rosier than it is. There's lots of waiting. There's lots of uncertainty. There's lots of, I don't know where my next gig is coming. I want to be a staff writer on The Hollywood Reporter, but right now I'm writing for them. Maybe is that the avenue I really want to go? Do I want to run another magazine? What do I want to do? But I knew fundamentally what I enjoy doing is I love genre entertainment. I love writing about it, and I love filmmaking, and most of all, on top of all that, I was thinking I really need to find something where I get to sit down with talent and interview them, because that's what I would love the most. And it all kind of very, very happily came together this way. But it's not something that I could have necessarily planned myself.
So they reached out to you. So did you have? So what was the follow up then? So they said, you want to come in. You sit. Did you sit down with the producer? How did that whole process work out?
Yeah, so Robin Block lives in London. He's London-based. The company is it's global in that we all work remotely, and it's a very small team. At the time, this was in September of 2018. When I talked to him on Zoom or Skype, I can't remember, but we had an interview that way. And what he likes to do is he likes to put together an advisor team, where he kind of puts everyone in, he kind of throws everyone in the ring on WhatsApp and says, here's a lot of things we plan to do. This is what our game plan is. This is what we're working on. What are your thoughts? And he has all these people advise. And I was happy to be part of that. And, I would just sort of observe the type of things that were going on in this advisor group. And I started realizing certain things about how they were going about it, where I said, listen, I'm not going to tell you how to do your job, but I see this and I see this and I see this, and I would recommend you do this instead and you do that instead, and this is probably a better way to do it in terms of, chasing after talent and structuring the movie and that kind of stuff like that. And because I had offered up, I said, listen, I'm happy to write questions, I'm happy to do interviews if you need me and if you want me to. That would be fun for me, and I'd be happy to be involved in the project. That's when Robin kind of took a leap of faith and offered me this because they didn't have a director, and I never said I'd like to direct this movie. But I kind of said, you need someone to steer this vision beginning to end. You can't just edit it in the editing, bay without some real serious guidance. And Robin had a very clear vision, don't get me wrong, but I think as a producer, you really need a director to see a project through from start to finish. And I think he recognized that was obviously the next step.
Well, he was very smart to pick you. This was your directorial debut.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
So I would think that with your experience having worked on set for 4 years, and also your vast experience as literary editor, it's all of that served you well deciding on how you wanted to piece this film together. Would you say that was the case?
Yeah, and on top of that, it definitely is sort of a collective knowledge that I picked up over the years on how to best approach telling a story and an angle and the organization of structure and outlining and material, and just a knowledge of how to digest a massive amount of movies in a 10-year period that was also a movement and a technology sea change, in terms of the way we consume this stuff with like cable and VHS and that kind of stuff. But when I was in Entertainment Tonight, I was constantly also putting together interview packages. And while the show would be doing real quick interview packages to go on the TV show Entertainment Tonight, for ET Online, I had the flexibility if I wanted to make a 5 or even a 10-minute piece with an interview from a junket that I did, or someone else had done, or archived footage, then I would do that. And so that really sort of, over the time that I was there, afforded me an opportunity to kind of understand how to best present material. And one of my favorite things at Entertainment Tonight was I had free reign with their vault. And their vault is all their archive footage going back, close to 30 years from when the show started. So if it was the anniversary of any movie, I could do a vault assault, is what we called it, and I'd get red carpet footage, junket footage, on-set footage, whatever they would have, and I could put an anniversary piece together for, say, Poltergeist, and there we are on set with Steven Spielberg talking, this is Jaws on land, and I could put that together, and that brought me absolute joy because that was material no one ever saw. And, that's the kind of stuff that gives me joy to share with others, and I could sort of apply to a movie like this where it's absolute nostalgia and it's a love letter to an era, but you also get to talk to people who were there and get unique insight that you might not get anywhere else.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. I mean, obviously, it says it in the title. It's 1980s, so you're talking about a very specific time period, a very specific time period in this country's history, a very specific time period in horror history. To me, the 1980s, having lived through it, and looking back on it. Before, while I was prepping for this interview, I was kind of thinking about it. And it's like the 1980s to me is a very interesting time because it kind of seems like that was the doorway between how things were done and how things will be done. You had cable TV, you had MTV, which was a huge influence.
Right.
You had the music that, I mean, how many channels are there for 80s music? You had computers in their in their infancy. You had all of these things that are happening, and then in the movies, you have this, the final girl comes up, which we'll talk about as well in a few minutes. You also have the sort of traditional type of horror movies that are happening, and then you have these newer, more modern, more gory, more special effects oriented, which now, nowadays, obviously it's all a lot of special effects and a lot more gore now, but it seems like it's that kind of in-between time. And I'm wondering, for you getting into this, how much about 80s horror were you familiar with, and how much research did you have to do as you started prep for this film?
Well, I lived and breathed it in real time because I was born in '68. So I grew up in the '70s as a '70s kid, and by the time I was in the '80s, I was an adolescent, and I could get my hands on all this stuff, rated R or not, especially with video or cable. And so to me, I got to some of my rites of passage, into, manhood, arguably, it was being able to watch, Roger Corman's Humanoids from the Deep, with my friend Glenn at his house as we were latchkey kids, and, his parents were off at work and my parents were off at work. And you could watch that kind of stuff, or a sleepover to friends, and I could watch Friday the 13th at 2 a.m. We didn't have cable, but I would selectively choose my friends when certain things were on the TV on cable,
Yeah. Been there.
And and I think we've all been there, with that kind of experience of seeing things you probably shouldn't have seen because you were still a little young, so your eyes got wide and you got a little wiser, if not a little shades of darkness added to your personality when you understood, what these movies were about and all that kind of stuff. Because a lot of times it was just the prurient interest of, TNA, and the gore was sort of a byproduct of that. But then sometimes that was the draw the other way around. But that era was also, it was very decidedly defined by, Rick Baker and Tom Savini and, early Stan Winston and Steve Johnson and Rob Bottin, all these just effects gurus who really changed the game, and that maybe hand in hand with Fangoria magazine, which was kind of the graduation magazine from Famous Monsters, which was more kiddie centric. It was a brand new ball game, and you knew these people, and they were your draw to a movie sometimes, or you would become clued into, it's a new John Carpenter film. I know John Carpenter. Halloween scared the crap out of me. And now he's doing some movie that's a remake, they tell me, about a thing in like a frozen tundra, and it's from outer space, but I don't know. It doesn't matter. It's John Carpenter. I want to see it, and I loved it. So did I have to do much homework? I actually did quite a bit of homework, because a lot of this is recontextualization of the stuff that I knew already, or that I dismissed already, or that I just had never gotten around to and had just seen bits and pieces, or that I heard of, or I was discovering for the first time, because there's so much material out there. But I was pretty well versed. I'm a genre fan through and through. Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, action, if it's a hybrid of all that stuff. But this was an opportunity to kind of revisit certain franchises that I kind of, at a certain point, when you're a teen and you become a little cynical, and you're like, yeah, well, I like the first one, but now they're just sequeling it, and it's just about the kills, and I kind of have they have a certain charm to them when you look back at them now, where you can recognize not the transparency of the producer's attempt to get money, but you could see the creativity that was involved, whether or not you recognized it in the first place. And that's the kind of thing that we're sort of exploring and revisiting and recontextualizing.
Now, you had quite a few people that you interviewed. So the process of beginning the interviews from beginning to end, how long would you say that all of that took? And were there people that you did try to get that weren't able to do it or didn't do it? And you don't have to give names. It's more of a curiosity thing than anything else.
Oh yeah, I mean, we aimed. I'm gonna mix my metaphors. We aimed for the fences. We shot for the moon. We wanted to get anyone and everyone. But the thing is, at a certain point, when more and more people are saying yes, you start realizing that you have to sort of temper the arrangement so it's not all lopsided. You need a variety of directors, actors, producers, writers, effects people, composers, journalists. People who are in their own right very accomplished in their field, like rock and roll, for example. Corey Taylor, but he's just like the ultimate fan. So he is an authority in terms of how he represents the fan enthusiasm, but he's someone that you can listen to. And so at a certain point, when you're getting towards 50 people, you realize, A, I'm running out of money, I'm running out of time. We could go all day by keeping, trying to add people, but at a certain point, you just got to draw the line. So we shot over a course of several months. Mind you, I got the job in 2018 in September, and we delivered it in October 2019. A 4.5-hour movie.
Wow.
Had been complete.
Wow.
And it was never intended to be a 4-hour movie. It just sort of, the demands of the structure, going from 1980 to 1989 and chapters in between and all this, material to tackle. It just kept on going. And I was very fortunate that Robin encouraged that and said, well, we've got all this great stuff, let's do it. The only reason why we stopped, and I'm getting tangential here, is because the format of a dual-layer disc, Blu-ray, only has so much material that it could hold before you get degradation of the resolution. So kind of had to draw the line at about 4 hours 20, and titles. But there were lots of people that I chased around who said yes, but we just couldn't make it work. Tom Savini, I will name as he's like the prime example. Wanted Tom. Tom said, sure, sounds good. And then we constantly went back and forth, and because he's in Pittsburgh and I'm in Los Angeles. And he's like, well, I'm going to be in Los Angeles. I'm doing a post on the Creepshow episode I did. I'll be available, but I'm not sure when they want me there. And so at a certain point, I went to Pittsburgh myself, and I sat down with Doug Bradley and Tom Atkins in the same day, and they both said to me, You're interviewing Tom Savini, right? And I'm like, I want to, but he's currently in Ireland right now, so it just never quite worked out. So one of the real joys of doing In Search of Darkness Part 2 was being able to assemble a bunch of the names that I wanted the first time around, and just either didn't have the room or the time or the schedules didn't align. And have him say, I saw the movie, I really loved it. All I can think of is that's my era and I should be in this movie. Why am I not in this movie? And now I am this time around. Robert Englund said the same thing, and those were very rewarding things to hear.
That's really nice to hear. Yeah, definitely. Talk about a validation, right?
Yeah. Well, come on. This is a movie where anytime you make a crowdfunded project, you want to A, complete it, B, satisfy the people who funded it, and I'm already losing my A, B's, and C's. And the next thing on the list is, you just hope the best and you hope people will be receptive. But if you're going to build a movie that's 4.5 hours, you're already got, the cards are stacked against you. You know, how many people really want to sit, you know, I can't, if I had a dime for everyone who said this should have been a series. But we're a small company funding a small project that kind of grew very big.
Hey, David, it should have been a series. I totally get it. You know.
I am not in disagreement.
Well, I mean, it
could have gotten more.
You know, but it's one of those things, though. You know what? You leave them wanting more. And, you know, sure, you can look at it and go, well, you know, it's 4.5 hour movie, whatever. But, I mean, you're talking about covering 10 years of a specific genre that is, you know, still incredibly influential. And when you think about it, really, I mean, the Friday the 13th documentary, Crystal Lake Memories, that's 7 hours. And the Nightmare on Elm Street documentary, Never Sleep Again, is 4 hours. So, I mean, it's like you have all, you know, these, you know, you have these two documentaries, and it's like, you know, that's just on a specific.
Those two
you know,
those two movies that you mentioned just now were my reinforcing guideposts that it can be done, that there is an audience for it. I thank those movies for you know, paving the way that people are willing to spend all that time on a single topic, you know, single franchise.
Yeah.
And that told me, it's like, well, I could do a 4.5 hour movie, and it's not just one movie or one franchise. It's about a whole decade, you know. And even if I'm only scratching the surface, I think people will have the tenacity to sit down for the whole thing, or at least it was designed where, like I said, you know, structured from 1980 to 1989 with chapters in between. You can kind of pick up and drop off and pick up again whenever you want, and watch them in chunks and still get a lot out of it.
So how much do you rely on your editor for this when you start putting this together?
Samuel Way, who works in the UK, is my Quato. He's my Belial, you know, from, you know, Total Recall reference and basket case reference. He's like my conjoined twin. And he is great, and he makes it fly. He has an amazing sense of pacing and mental acuity that he puts to this to make it fly. And he does a lot of the graphics himself, along with Paul Conchake, who's another gentleman on our team who does these amazing, you know, the intro graphics and the chapter breaks and things like that. But you know, I couldn't do this myself. The way it works is I take all this material, and it's already based on a very specific outline of content that I want to cover and avenues that I want to take. And that goes into the question and answer process when you sit down with someone for an hour or two, and you get to talk about very specific topics, their own films, and then films they love and why. That's sort of the basic, you know, meat and potatoes of this. But then you have to take all that material and choose all the movies that are going to make it within a time frame that you can manage. And B, you've got to sort of create a chorus of voices talking about movies or concepts that make sense and progress the story forward. And so, is that redundant? Progress the story forward. Make the story progress. So, you know, that's something that it's a very meticulous scripting. And what I do is I do all of that. And then I hand it to Sam and Samuel Way, and we work on it together. But what's nice about the time difference is that, you know, I'll give him a script, he'll assemble the cuts, I'll see if it flows and makes sense. I might, you know, rearrange some stuff. I give him some carte blanche sometimes where he just knows. He's like, well, this didn't work and this was a bit redundant, so I took the liberty of taking this out. Is that cool? And then next thing we know, if it makes all sense to ourselves and it's within the running time of the overall running time, then we start, well, we like to call it painting it. We paint it with clips to illustrate what people are talking about. And then that's kind of the process. But he's absolutely crucial and deserves all the credit in the world when people say that this movie flies by and is engaging and entertaining, because he's the guy who makes that work.
Yes, the movie really does fly by, and I think that's a credit to the way that you did put this film together. Now, David, at the top of the program, for your introduction, you mentioned not just part 1, but part 2. So I know that got a lot of people's attention when they heard part 2, especially for those that were not aware that part 2 was in the works. So what can you tell us about part 2, and when can we expect to see it?
Well, you can pre-order it now, and now's the time to jump on it. So In Search of Darkness Part 2 is available now as a pre-sale between now and Halloween night at midnight. And so if you go to 80shorrordoc.com, you can get it. If you get it now, you can get your name in the credits alongside, it's another 4.5-hour movie. And it's a lot of the original people from the first one. Over 40 people are carrying over to the new one, but we have 15 new faces, including Robert Englund and Tom Savini and Linnea Quigley and Jaretta of Demons and Nancy Allen, and I could go on and on and on. It's really great. I did 23 new interviews, so we went back to the likes of Bill Moseley and Kane Hodder and Cassandra Peterson and Phil Noble and others. But this is a deeper dive where it's a broader view. So a lot of the Italian horror, a lot of the world horror. I got to talk to Shinya Tsukamoto, the director of Tetsuo, the Iron Man, when he was in Tokyo. That's great stuff. That really makes me happy that we get to include that this time around and continue the story, where for another 4.5 hours we go from 1980 to 1989 with brand new chapters and topics in between. So it's a whole other world of 80s horror where if you thought In Search of Darkness Part 1 just kind of scratched the surface and there was more story to tell, well, now we're doing it. And so the movie's in post right now. It's completely done other than the polish and the graphics and the sound design. And Weary Pines, who did the soundtrack for the first one, are back with more new material. I'm very excited to share it with everybody, but now's the only time to get it. And we're offering it in a package where, you get lots of cool swag. You get some posters and enamel pins and slipcovers and digital download of the soundtrack. You get a digital copy of In Search of Darkness 2 and a digital copy of In Search of Darkness 1. And if you miss the chance to get In Search of Darkness 1 as a physical copy, a Blu-ray or DVD, you have the option of getting that as well. And then one more thing about that is that there's this whole sort of community that has really come together around this film. And we've decided to put an online Discord community together for In Search of Darkness, where we do watch parties and Q&As with, the likes of Jeffrey Combs, when we do Reanimator, things like that. And you get a 12-month season pass with it. So we're turning this from just a documentary experience into a collective fan experience. And
that's fantastic.
Yeah, 80shorrordoc.com, or all the socials are at 80shorrordoc.
That's great. And then how much longer will Part 1 be streaming on Shudder?
That's going to be streaming on there for a while. That doesn't end at midnight on Halloween. That's just the In Search of Darkness.
Gotcha.
But the thing is, a lot of people think, well, I'll just wait until it comes on Shudder. But there are no plans. The plan right now is we put our heart and soul and blood, sweat, and tears in doing a whole second other movie. So we're selling it directly now. But there's no plans for any other distribution at this point. So now's the time to jump on it.
Well, David, I think this is a perfect spot for us to pause this interview right now. We'll end on part 2. This topic is so big, it's going to take 2 podcasts. So why don't you hang tight, and you and I will revisit this on the next podcast.
I am holding tight. I am holding at the edge of my seat to continue.
All right, well, that does it for part 1 of my interview with David Weiner. Just kind of setting things up. Part 2, we're going to get into all kinds of stuff. We're going to talk about, obviously, John Carpenter, Stephen King. We're going to get into special effects of the time. We're going to talk a little bit about home video market and home video stores. We're going to get into, I'm going to tell him my scanner story. Stay tuned for that. That will be headed your way in November. In the meantime, let's talk about what David had mentioned regarding In Search of Darkness Part 2. Now, if you want to go to the website, it's real simple. It's 80shorrordoc.com. So that's 80s horror, HORROR, doc.com. 80shorrordoc.com. You have different ways of getting a part of this. There's the fan credit tier, there's the associate producer tier, the producer tier, and executive producer tier. Obviously, they're all going to carry different dollar amounts with it. So let's just start at the very beginning, which is fan credit. This is the one that I'll just talk about, and then you can look into the rest on your own. So with this, for fan credit, you will get the following. Okay, you will get your choice of a Blu-ray or DVD of In Search of Darkness Part 2. You're going to get 3 posters done by 3 different artists for In Search of Darkness Part 2. You're also going to get an enamel pin. You will also receive a digital download for the soundtrack. You will also get your name in the credits. You'll have a box there how you would like your name to be put in the credits. And then you will get a digital version as well of Part 2, and you will get a digital version of Part 1 as well. Now, if you want to get a hard copy of Part 1, you can do that for an extra $15. You can get a Blu-ray of In Search of Darkness Part 1 included as well. Otherwise, if you choose not to, you will still get the digital version for Part 1. They will send you the code for that as well. Now, what's really cool is there is something called the Community Season Pass, and that you will get for 1 year. It is a 12-month season pass to the In Search of Darkness community. That's going to feature regular watch parties and special events, totaling 60-plus hours of online entertainment. Now, what's great is that they did some nice trailers for this on their website. So if you go to 80shorrordoc.com, you can watch a small little trailer presentation for the film itself. And then they have on the bottom, they have a community trailer, and you'll see what it is. This is really cool, and I'm really excited to see that they did a Part 2. As I've told David, I'm such a fan of Part 1, and to see Part 2 coming out is great. Now, full disclosure, after the interview, I went to the website, and I bought a fan credit. So the Graveyard Show podcast was very happy to contribute to the film, and I can't wait to see the film as well, and this is just some great stuff. So there you have it. So In Search of Darkness Part 2. Now, in the meantime, as I mentioned, the second part of this interview will appear in November, and that's pretty much going to be my November podcast. And in that November podcast, I will also inform you plans I have for December. I have a couple of ideas that I'm going to do for December, just some fun stuff to end the year out, and I will let you know what that is next month. In the meantime, if you want to reach out to me, you can do so by email, gyspodcast@gmail.com. gyspodcast@gmail.com. The Graveyard Show podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and was just recently added to iHeartRadio. The show is also available on YouTube. Just search for The Graveyard Show podcast. If you know anyone who's a fan of horror, please invite them to enter the graveyard. New listeners and friends are always welcome. In the meantime, my friends, enjoy your Halloween. Please, if you're going to be doing anything, please be safe. I look forward to seeing all of you back here in November. So in the meantime, as you exit the graveyard, I would like to remind you to please lock the gate behind you. We wouldn't want anyone to get out. Happy Halloween, everybody.